The first time my business failed, I told myself it was just bad timing. The second time I ran out of excuses. I remember standing in the empty storefront on a Tuesday afternoon. Boxes stacked against the walls, the smell of fresh paint still lingering from when I thought this version would work. My daughter had helped me pick the color. Something warm, she said, something that makes people feel welcome. But no one came. The silence in that space was heavier than any conversation I'd ever had. I looked at the lease agreement in my hand, at the numbers that didn't add up no matter how many times I rearranged them. And I felt something inside me go quiet. Not broken exactly, but tired. So deeply tired. People don't talk about what happens after you fail twice. How the third chance feels less like hope and more like proof you don't know when to stop. That afternoon, I locked the door and walked away, carrying nothing but the weight of wondering if I ever get it right. The first time my business failed, I told myself it was just bad timing. The second time, I ran out of excuses. I remember standing in the empty storefront on a Tuesday afternoon, boxes stacked against the walls, the smell of fresh paint still lingering from when I thought this version would work. My daughter had helped me pick the color. Something warm, she said, something that makes people feel welcome. But no one came. The silence in that space was heavier than any conversation I'd ever had. I looked at the lease agreement in my hand, at the numbers that didn't add up no matter how many times I rearranged them, and I felt something inside me go quiet. Not broken exactly, but tired. So deeply tired. People don't talk about what happens after you fail twice. How the third chance feels less like hope and more like proof you don't know when to stop. That afternoon, I locked the door and walked away, carrying nothing but the weight of wondering if I'd ever get it right. My name is Margaret, and I turned 53 the week before that second business closed. I've always been the kind of woman who keeps busy, who finds purpose in making things work even when they shouldn't. My hands are always moving, folding laundry, sorting papers, arranging flowers in cheap vases just to make the kitchen table look less empty. I live alone now in a rental apartment on the east side of town, where the walls are thin enough to hear my neighbor's television through the plaster, and the hallway always smells faintly of cooking oil and old carpet. The windows face a parking lot, and in the mornings I watch people leave for work while I drink my coffee standing up, still in my robe, still pretending I have somewhere important to be. I wasn't always like this. There was a time when I had routines that mattered, when my days had structure and meaning beyond just filling hours. I used to wake at 5:30 every morning, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd make a list while the coffee brewed, plan my day with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing your place in the world. Back then I had a small bakery, my first business, and it felt like everything I'd ever worked for was finally taking shape. The smell of bread rising in the early morning darkness, the warmth of the ovens against my face, the way customers smiled when they walked in and saw the display case full of things I'd made with my own hands. It wasn't just a business. It was proof that I could build something that mattered. Comment below where you're watching from and share if life has ever tested you like this. Don't forget to subscribe. The story is just beginning. I'd spent 28 years working for other people before I opened that bakery. Factory jobs mostly, the kind where you clock in and clock out and your worth is measured in hours, not ideas. I raised 2 children on those wages, stretched every paycheck until it covered what needed covering, and told myself that someday I'd do something for myself. My husband left when the kids were still young, and I learned quickly that survival doesn't wait for you to feel ready. You just do what needs doing. So I worked double shifts, saved every dollar I could spare, and dreamed about the day I'd walk into a space that belonged to me. When I finally opened the bakery, I was 47 years old. My daughter was in college, and my son had just started working construction, and for the first time in decades, I could breathe without calculating the cost. I signed the lease on a tiny corner shop with big windows and creaking wooden floors, and I spent 3 months renovating it myself. I painted the walls pale yellow, installed secondhand shelves, and hung a sign above the door that I'd paid someone to carve by hand. Margaret's Kitchen, it said, simple and true. The day I opened, I stood behind the counter at 6 in the morning and watched the sun rise through those big windows, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe, or just the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd finally arrived somewhere I was meant to be. For 2 years, that bakery was everything. I perfected recipes I'd been making since my children were small, learned to manage inventory and suppliers, built relationships with regular customers who came in every morning for the same pastry and the same brief conversation. There was a man who always ordered a blueberry muffin and never stayed to eat it, just tucked it into his coat pocket and nodded at me on his way out. There was a woman who came in every Friday with her granddaughter, and they'd sit by the window sharing a cinnamon roll, while the little girl colored on paper napkins. I learned their names, remembered their orders, became a small but steady part of their routines. It felt good to be needed like that, to matter in someone's day even in the smallest way. But the city rezoned the street for commercial development, and my rent tripled in a single year. I tried to negotiate, tried to explain that small businesses can't absorb that kind of increase overnight, but the landlord was polite and unmoved. The building was being sold, he said. There was nothing he could do. I watched my savings disappear into lease payments, watched my profit margins shrink until there was nothing left to cut. I stopped taking a salary. I stopped buying new inventory. I baked smaller batches, turned off lights in rooms I wasn't using, did everything I could to make the numbers work. But they didn't. And one morning I unlocked the door knowing it would be the last time, and I stood in that empty shop with the pale yellow walls and the big windows, and I cried in a way I hadn't cried since my husband left. I thought that was the worst of it. I thought losing something you'd built with your own hands was as low as life could take you. But I was wrong. I spent 6 months recovering from that first failure. I took a job stocking shelves at a grocery store, working nights so I wouldn't have to see people I knew. I avoided conversations about the bakery, about what happened, about what came next. My daughter called every week and asked if I was okay, and I said yes because I didn't know how to explain that I wasn't sure I'd ever be okay again. My son stopped by sometimes with takeout food, and we'd eat in silence, and I could see the worry in his eyes even when he didn't say anything. He thought I was giving up. Maybe I was. But something about night shifts does strange things to your mind. You work in fluorescent silence while the rest of the world sleeps, and you have too much time to think, too much space to notice all the ways you've disappeared from your own life. I started watching other people, customers who came in late, tired from their own long days, buying milk and bread and cereal with the kind of automatic exhaustion that comes from routine. And I realized I didn't want to be invisible anymore. I didn't want to stock shelves for the rest of my life, moving products from one place to another without ever creating anything that mattered. So I tried again. The second business was different. I told myself I'd learned from my mistakes, that I'd be smarter this time, more careful. I found a smaller space with cheaper rent, focused on catering instead of a storefront, built a client base through word of mouth and farmers markets. I made wedding cakes and birthday cakes and desserts for office parties, worked out of a commercial kitchen I rented by the hour, drove deliveries in my old car with boxes, stacked carefully in the back seat. It was harder than the bakery, lonelier. I missed having a space that was mine, missed the regulars and the routine, and the feeling of walking into a place where I belonged. But I convinced myself it was working. The orders came steadily, the reviews were good, and for a while I thought maybe I'd figured it out. Then my car broke down. Not just a flat tire or a dead battery, but something fundamental and expensive, something that would cost more to fix than the car was worth. And without a car, I couldn't make deliveries. Without deliveries, I couldn't fulfill orders. I borrowed money from my daughter, took out a small loan I knew I shouldn't take, tried to piece together a solution that would keep everything from falling apart. But the clients who'd been understanding at first started canceling orders, leaving reviews that mentioned unreliability and missed deadlines. The commercial kitchen raised their hourly rates. The loan payments piled up faster than I could pay them down, and once again, I found myself staring at numbers that wouldn't balance no matter how hard I tried. That's when I stood in the empty storefront I'd rented with the last of my savings, the one my daughter had helped me paint, and I felt the weight of 2 failures pressing down on me like something physical. I'd lost the bakery to circumstances I couldn't control, and I'd lost the catering business to circumstances I should have anticipated, and I didn't know which was worse, being defeated by bad luck or being defeated by my own poor planning. I was 53 years old and I had nothing to show for it. No business, no savings, no clear path forward. Just debt and doubt and the growing certainty that maybe I wasn't cut out for this after all. Maybe some people are meant to work for others, to follow instructions and collect paychecks, and never risk anything that might break them. Maybe I was out of those people, and I'd spent years pretending otherwise. I took another job. This time it was cleaning offices downtown, working early mornings before the business day started. I'd arrive at 4:30 when the streets were still dark and empty, let myself into buildings with keys the management company provided, and spend 3 hours vacuuming carpets and wiping down desks and emptying trash cans in spaces that belong to other people. It was invisible work, the kind where you're only noticed if you do it wrong, and there was something almost comforting about that invisibility. No one expected anything from me except clean floors and empty wastebaskets. No one asked about my plans or my dreams or why a woman my age was pushing a vacuum through corporate hallways at 5 in the morning. But the loneliness was brutal. Not the physical kind of loneliness, not the absence of people, but the deeper kind that comes from feeling like you've lost your purpose. I'd watch executives arrive in their pressed suits and expensive shoes, talking on phones and carrying briefcases full of important papers, and I'd think about how I used to be someone too. I used to own things, build things, create things that people wanted. And now I was just the woman who cleaned up after them, invisible and anonymous and completely forgettable. My daughter got married that year. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, and I stood in the back wearing a dress I'd bought on sale and tried to feel happy. She was radiant, glowing with the kind of joy that comes from building a life with someone who loves you, and I was proud of her. But I was also sad in a way I hadn't expected. Sad that I couldn't afford to help pay for the wedding, sad that I had to explain why I couldn't contribute more than a few $100s toward the reception. Sad that when people asked me what I was doing now, I had to say I was between opportunities, which was just a polite way of saying I'd failed twice and didn't know how to try again. She never made me feel small about it. That's not who my daughter is. But I made myself feel small, and that was worse. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was cleaning an office on the 14th floor, wiping down a conference table, still cluttered with coffee cups and meeting notes, when I noticed a business plan someone had left behind. It was printed on nice paper, bound with a clear cover, full of charts and projections and professional language. I shouldn't have read it. It wasn't my business, wasn't meant for me. But I did. I stood there in my cleaning uniform with a rag in my hand, and I read through the entire thing. 23 pages of someone else's dream laid out in careful detail. It was a proposal for a small consulting firm, something about helping local businesses improve their operations and marketing. The woman who wrote it, her name was on the cover page, had experience in retail management and wanted to use that experience to help other people succeed. She outlined her services, identified her target market, projected modest but realistic growth over 3 years. It was thoughtful and thorough and completely achievable, and as I read it I felt something shift inside me. I realized I knew how to do this. Not consulting exactly, but helping. I'd run 2 businesses, made every mistake there was to make, learned lessons that only come from failure. I knew what worked and what didn't, knew the small details that make the difference between surviving and thriving. I knew how to stretch a budget, how to build customer relationships, how to recover from setbacks that feel insurmountable. And there were probably hundreds of people out there trying to start their own businesses who needed someone to tell them the truth. Not the glossy, inspirational version, but the real version about what it actually takes. I left that office and I didn't come back. I called the management company that afternoon and told them I was done, effective immediately. It wasn't professional and it wasn't smart. But I couldn't spend another morning cleaning up after other people when I finally understood what I was supposed to be doing. I spent the next 3 months building something new. Not a bakery, not a catering business, but a consulting practice focused on helping women over 40 start small businesses. I used every cent I had left to create a simple website, printed business cards at the library, and started reaching out to community centers and women's group free workshops. I talked about the mistakes I'd made, the lessons I'd learned the hard way, the real challenges of starting over when you're older and the stakes feel impossibly high. I was honest about my failures, about standing in empty storefronts and crying over numbers that wouldn't balance, about the loneliness that working night shifts and wondering if you'd ever matter again. And people listened. The first client was a woman named Patricia who wanted to open a vintage clothing store, but didn't know where to start. She'd been saving for years, had a clear vision, but was terrified of making mistakes that would cost her everything. We met at a coffee shop and I walked her through the process. Finding the right location, negotiating lease terms, managing inventory, building a customer base. I told her about my rent tripling, about commercial kitchen rates, about the importance of having backup plans for your backup plans. She hired me on the spot. Then came Maria, who wanted to start a home-based catering business. Then Susan, who had a talent for graphic design but no idea how to turn it into income. Then Jennifer and Amanda and Carol, women in their 40s and 50s and 60s who had skills and dreams and savings they were terrified to risk. I met with each of them, listened to their plans, shared my experience, helped them avoid the mistakes that had broken me, and slowly, carefully, I built something that felt sustainable. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden moment of triumph, no vindication or poetic justice. Just steady work and modest income and the quiet satisfaction of watching other women succeed where I had struggled. Patricia's vintage store celebrated its 1-year anniversary. Maria's catering business grew large enough that she had to hire help. Susan landed her first major client and sent me a thank you card with a gift certificate inside. And I realized that maybe my failures hadn't been pointless after all. Maybe they'd been preparation for something I couldn't have done without them. I still live in that same rental apartment with the thin walls and the parking lot view. I still drink my coffee standing up in the mornings, still fold laundry and arrange cheap flowers on the kitchen table. But the difference is I wake up now with purpose. I have client meetings scheduled, workshops to prepare, emails from women who've heard about my services and want to know if I can help them too. I make enough to cover my bills and slowly pay down the debt from those earlier failures. I'm not rich and I'm not famous, and I'll probably never have another storefront with my name above the door. But I matter again, not because I succeeded, but because I failed and learned to turn that failure into something useful. I help women who are terrified of trying, who've been told they're too old or too inexperienced or too damaged by their own mistakes. I sit across from them in coffee shops and community centers and I tell them the truth. That failure is real and painful and sometimes unavoidable, but it doesn't have to be the end of your story. My daughter had a baby last year, a little girl with dark eyes and her mother's smile. I was in the delivery room when she was born, holding my daughter's hand through the contractions and the pushing and the final overwhelming moment when new life enters the world. And afterward, when everything was quiet and my daughter was resting with the baby on her chest, she looked at me and said she was proud of me. Not for the businesses I'd tried to build, but for the person I'd become in spite of losing them. I think about that often now. About how we measure success and failure, about what it means to build a life that matters. I spent years thinking success meant having something with my name on it, something tangible I could point to and say, this is mine, I made this. But maybe success is quieter than that. Maybe it's knowing you survived the worst of yourself and came out stronger. Maybe it's being able to someone else avoid the pain you couldn't escape. Maybe it's just waking up each day with purpose and going to bed each night without regret. The third time didn't make me rich. It didn't erase the failures or give me back the years I spent cleaning offices and stocking shelves and wondering if I'd ever matter again. But it gave me something more important than success. It gave me peace, the kind of peace that comes from accepting who you are and what you've learned and finding a way to wait enough. I'm 56 now, and when I look at my life I see all the broken pieces and wrong turns and moments I thought would destroy me. But I also see the women I've helped, the businesses that survived because someone told them the truth, the quiet difference I've made in lives that might have ended differently. And I realized that maybe the point was never to succeed on the first try or the second try. Maybe the point was to keep trying until I finally understood what I was really building. Some mornings I still think about that bakery with the pale yellow walls and the big windows. I think about the blueberry muffin man, and the grandmother and her granddaughter and all the small waitered to people I barely knew. I miss that version of my life sometimes, miss the simplicity of making bread and watching the sunrise and knowing exactly who I was supposed to be. But I don't regret losing it, Because losing it taught me something I could never have learned any other way. That your worth isn't measured by what you build or what you keep, but by how you respond when everything falls apart. And I responded by getting up again, and again, and one more time after that, until I finally got it right. That's what I tell the women who come to me now, the ones sitting across from me with fear in their eyes and dreams they're terrified to risk. I tell them that failure is part of the process, not the end of it. I tell them that the third time might not be perfect, but it might be exactly what they need. I tell them that I failed twice before I understood what I was really meant to do, and that those failures weren't obstacles. They were the path. And when they look at me with that mixture of hope and doubt, I smile and say what I wish someone had told me years ago. That it's okay to fail. It's okay to try again. It's okay to take longer than you thought you would to find your place in the world. Because the only real failure is giving up before you learn what your failures were trying to teach you. I don't know if they believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either, back when I was standing in that empty storefront wondering if I'd ever get it right. But I plant the seed anyway, and I watch it grow in them the way it eventually grew in me. Slowly, painfully, inevitably, and that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything.